On behalf of the museum, I'd like to say thank you to SACWA, both Lucy and Martha, for helping us organize this textile talk, as well as the other sponsoring organizations. We are delighted to be here today and to present these wonderful rug artists. I'm the curator at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts, and I'm very glad to be joined today by artists Rachelle LeBlanc, Heather Goodchild, and Susan Feller. All three of these artists were in an exhibition at the museum that actually unfortunately recently closed. However, you can see other talks with the artists on our YouTube page, along with exhibition walkthrough if you're interested. The exhibition brought together 13 artists from throughout the United States and Canada. And while the exhibition is closed, as I introduced Rachelle, Heather, and Susan, I thought I would show you some of their works in situ. Rachelle LeBlanc is a Canadian textile artist whose work explores the shifting paradigms of people and place through narrative figures, landscapes, and sculpture. Influenced by the radical reshaping of the rural landscape she grew up in, she investigates how our lives are affected by our experiences, surroundings, and the connections we form with other people, friends, and family. LeBlanc received a degree in fashion technique and design from Sheridan College in Oakville, Ontario, and worked as a sportswear designer in Montreal for 20 years, until moving to Alberta in 2008 with her husband and 2 daughters. Heather Goodchild has exhibited across North America since 2002. Goodchild's practice involves exploring the rituals, regalia, and symbols of world religions and non-denominational societies in an attempt to understand the purpose of these traditions, with special attention towards morality, personal development, and the journey towards fulfillment. Using textile techniques such as rug hooking, inlaid patchwork, screen printing, and quilting, she has developed new ways to execute old crafts, creating pieces that seem to exist both in the past and present. And Susan Feller, in 1994, Susan Feller added rug hooking to the traditional handcrafts learned since childhood. Over 2 decades at Ruckman Mill Farm, she designed rug patterns and workshops focusing on PA German Frockers. Selling this line to Green Mountain hooked rugs allowed her to devote studio time to original work addressing environmental and social issues. She is the author of Design Basics for Rug Hookers, has served on the board of Rug Hooking Magazine, and currently is on the board of Tamarack Foundation for the Arts in West Virginia. So I've asked each of these artists to tell us about the arc of their work from where they started to where they are going. And I can't wait to hear what they have to say. They each are going to present for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then we'll have questions at the end. Thank you again. We're going to start with Susan.
Thank you, Emily, and certainly SACWA. I've followed Textile Talks probably since the very beginning, and I appreciate this honor. As I was mentioned in my description, my introduction, I learned to rug hook, which for me was simply understanding how to keep the second loop from not pulling out the first one, from a customer who brought a hooked rug in for me to frame. I was living in New Jersey and she brought it in. She knew how to do it and gave me that 15-minute lesson. My husband and I were building our log home here in West Virginia at that time, and what else do you put on your floor but hooked rugs? So that led to a business, Ruckman Mill Farm, and over 200 patterns that I developed, vending across the United States. I quickly learned that you don't just sell a pattern to succeed, you need to also have the wool that goes along with it. So I learned to dye some wools and select my own patterns to show. I'm fascinated by rug hooking because of how just those simple line drawings can be interpreted over and over in a variety of different ways. However, what colors and materials each maker chooses. Sometimes one flower will be bolder just because of the values, or they'll focus on the background. And it's always exciting to see how to change it. The dye recipes and eventually a product with a multitude of Frockter motifs in it of my interest in empowering people to be independent. So instead of selling the dyed wool to people, I want them to be able to dye their own colors and be the masters of that, and to create their own patterns and rug designs instead of buying my pattern. After about 15 years of bending and being very immersed in rug hooking, I stepped back on my 59th year and every day sketched a 5-inch square, because I wanted to really explore the previous fiber techniques that I had learned from my grandmother and my mother, and new ones. I picked up pin loom weaving and backstrap weaving. I found that I really enjoyed embroidery, and some of these squares, maybe about 60% of them are just completely hooked. So when I took them apart to sell, I was able to whip the edges, and they were small mats. But many of them were pieces that had to be framed. So you can see that I used applique and embroidery and painted the canvas, explored a variety of different yarns and the textures that they can add to just the typical rug would be strips of wool fabric. And when you add different materials, the texture changes. Over that year, I didn't just make 5-inch squares. Some of them were studies for larger pieces. And I had this really long piece of linen, and I kept thinking, oh, it's going to be a horizontal view of all the mountains of West Virginia. And it just wasn't working until I created a 12-inch high by 5-inch wide piece. And I realized I could do a slice of you traveling through the mountains from the beginning on our straight highways and all the way up to our beautiful mountaintop. West Virginia is known as the Mountain State, completely engulfed in the Appalachians. So I do tend to let fabric kind of audition on my pieces as it goes along. And eventually some of them trial correctly and we have to change a few out. Value and technique in hooking is very, very important to help portray the motifs that I'm working on, and also distance. Now that I'm in my own studio and working on original work, I like to explore a line drawing in a variety of different techniques. So in the first two on the left, they were in the exhibit at Hooked by Design. The first one is the largest, and it is the most realistic. The very background piece is applique dyed wool. Took me 4 different times to get what I think was an appropriate coloring and value of early spring sky in West Virginia. And believe it or not, what's really important to me was the background, the foreground, the forest floor, and how I approached it in each of the pieces. So in the first one, there's one plaid that I took apart, separated into lights and darks, and hooked a pattern up 2 loops, and then going to the left to up and back, it created a zigzag. And in the darker shadows, I added a variety of other wools and did not keep it just loops. So it's very ragged, the textural piece. All of our fiber art, people, when they're looking at them on an exhibit, they want to touch them. When I created color in our trees, the second one, I eliminated the naturalism and did it in a more linear style, which is something that I had kind of developed over that year's study. So it's a trademark of my work. You'll often see that I hook linearly, vertical or horizontally for elements that I want to just recede to the background and let, in this case, color be the most important. And then embroidery, it's really important. And when I'm embroidering, I oftentimes just do that skeleton of the design. One is collage of upholstery fabric, so it's much more dimensional. I really like to explore and create work these days about the environmental impact on nature and how humans are affecting it. Mixing my media, including, I thought it was really appropriate to use the green straws, plastic straws from Starbucks, to depict the gas pipes that are laid throughout West Virginia in what hopefully is going to accomplish being a pipeline that goes nowhere. And I call this mountains of energy. The pipes were laid in straight lines, destroying woods and fields. And certainly we do have wind turbines going also. Another approach and way that our resources are being extracted from the state is mountaintop removal. There are over 500 mountains in West Virginia whose tops have been blown off just for that tiny little vein of coal that's left. And in this piece, it's mostly quilted, just the brooch has rug hooking in it and silver wire. It's removable to show the coal. When it's put back on, you see the damage that has happened to our beautiful mountains. And this is another Google Earth depiction of a variety of mountaintops that have been removed in the area. The middle central part, lower central part of West Virginia is very mountainous. It's beautiful. And these areas are being excavated, supposedly renovated afterwards with grass, which is not natural, and maybe some lavender farms. In this piece, the pin, which is located at the upper top, can be taken off and moved wherever you want, which is a lot easier than mountaintop removal these days. So in the end, I want people to consider their own impact on nature and where does your energy come from. That's the messages I want my work to put out for people. They might be pretty, but there's also an underlining message.
Thank you, Susan. Heather, do you want to go next?
Okay. Okay, I'm Heather Goodchild. Here's my presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me to this talk. And Susan, thank you for that. It was incredible. I am a visual artist. I trained in fashion design in Toronto, graduating in 2000. And my ambition was to work in the film industry as a costume designer. But I quickly realized that this was not the path for me. And I got into the visual arts, starting with textile and installation work and moving more recently into painting and ceramics. So on this slide, you'll see sort of an overview of the kinds of works I do. I started rug hooking in 2004 because I was doing an exhibition in which I was using decorative arts to tell stories within rooms. So the idea was the viewer would come into this room and there was a little book that told a folk story. And within the room, they would find elements of the folk story. So I needed a rug to tell one of the stories. And I had remembered that my great aunt had hooked rugs. And I went to the local library, found a book, and in the book the woman said, this is the easiest thing, it'll take you 5 minutes. And I think Susan mentioned that she just got this quick lesson, and it's true, anyone can pick it up really quickly. And I think I did this first rug with a latch hook because I couldn't find a proper rug hook, which was much harder after I got a rug hook, I realized. But this was the first rug, and I realized how much I liked this textile craft. I think because it is very similar to painting in many ways, and I think I was kind of a frustrated painter working in textiles because there is a freedom of movement that you don't get in quilting, and I've been working a lot in quilting. This was a rug from 2009. I was interested in, again, telling stories. This was related to mythology and this idea that this mythologist Joseph Campbell had about the monomyth, about the hero's journey. And I translated this sort of masculine idea into more of a feminine journey. And it's about leaving your community and going off and finding your destiny and making a sacrifice along the way. So at this point in 2009, I was preoccupied with these ideas. This is another version of that same journey on the left. And I was interested in making artifacts that might seem like they were from a different time period, that they could be found maybe in an antique store, and you kind of had to decode what they had been used for. The black wheel, I thought it would have been used for a ladies' organization, and it was sort of like the job wheel, but also kind of like the Wheel of Fortune in sort of tarot symbology. So that's what that's about. The faces within the wheel are this technique that I worked in quite a bit back then called Inlaid Patchwork, in which I took this wool felt, I cut it into little pieces, and then I stained it with watercolor and sewed them back together. And then I embroidered the faces. This is also mainly inlaid patchwork, but I wanted to show you these two because of the lamb, which was one of my, I only did 2 3D rug hooks, but this was one of them, which was a lot of fun, but very challenging. And I was excited to see that there were some 3D rug hookings in the Hooked by Design show. Again, I was working within this idea of this ladies organization, long past, almost like a ladies version of the Freemasons. And I think I was grappling with my own ideas of my place in the community, in society, and growing up without a sort of religious or moral framework, sort of how you create your own iconography. The one on the left is about the coming of spring, which just happened, which is nice. Then I sort of got a bit more away from this narrative framework, and I moved more into sort of emotional impulses in my hooked rugs, and I was trying to make them a little bit more painterly. This is from 2014, as is this one. Again, I was still influenced by storytelling, biblical stories, folk tales. I was doing a lot of over dyeing of this wool, not so much dyeing from scratch, but tea dyeing a lot, and using old clothing, cutting it up, and finding yardage in the stores to cut up. From there, I got more interested in painting, and I wanted to create rugs that exactly reflected the painting. And through this, I got really into dyeing, and I got into both acid dyeing with chemicals as well as natural dyeing, because I find the two have very distinct results. And I found that the rug hooking and the dyeing and the finding the colors actually impacted my painting, and it made me better at mixing colors for both oil and watercolor. So in these two, you can see how I took the painting and I created the rug using it as a model. This was most influenced by my visit to France, where I went to see the Gobelin tapestry workshop, and I saw how they used these very beautiful paintings as models for their tapestries, and the hundreds and hundreds of colors they would use to create the tapestries. And I wanted to sort of use that idea within rug hooking. These ones, I was working sort of with paintings as models, but but rougher, not as exacting. But again, the influence of having more colors to work with and a broader palette, I think, is evident in these. And I think this is sort of a coming together of the past work that's linked with symbols, but it's almost entering sort of a dream narrative and more personal events reflected in archetypal symbols. And then this is one of my most recent ones. Again, I'm going back to just recreating a painting. This was a painting I did last year in spring, just you know, a few weeks away from now when the daffodils start coming up in Toronto. And this was the first rug where I sort of had this white edge around the edge of the rug, sort of recreating the rough painting edge, which I really liked, because I often find it challenging to know how to finish the edge. And I like this sort of how it's straight, but then it's also raggedy because of the way the color meets the white hooking. This is my first one where I actually digitally manipulated an image to create something, and then sort of it's partly directly influenced, but it's partly sort of freestyle as I was working on it. So it's sort of the combination of the two. And then finally, here's one in progress. Sorry, the rug is such a bad picture, but here you can see how I just do a really rough sketch on the burlap and a grid, and then I grid out whatever my reference is, if I am using a reference. I find the ones where I just go freestyle don't generally turn out as well, or they take a lot longer because I end up tearing out a lot and redoing it. But the beauty of rug hooking, I find, in contrast to something more like quilting, is that you can go back and tear things out and change them and switch colors. And whereas with quilting, you know, once it's in there, like I remember these huge quilts I used to make, and I would hate a color, and I'd go in and I'd unpick it, and it was just, you know, it's much easier in rug hooking to go back. Yeah, so that is my presentation. Just gonna get out of here.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is Rachelle LeBlanc. Let me see, hold on, let's see. Share screen. There. My name is Rachelle LeBlanc, and I'm a visual artist, and I'm self-taught. For 20 years, I was a fashion designer in Montreal, and after a few years, I started not wanting to be a fashion designer anymore. So when my husband got a job opportunity in Alberta, I quickly said, let's go. And when he asked me what I was going to end up doing in Alberta, because there's no fashion industry, I said, well, I'm going to do this full time. I'm just going to be an artist and we'll see what happens. And he was kind enough to just look at me and say, you're going to need more wool. So I was really happy that he was very supportive of this crazy idea that I was going to be a full-time rug hooker. I started rug hooking in 2003, and in 2003, we had dial-up internet, so I didn't know that there were people doing this craft at all. And when I spoke to my mother-in-law, she said she had a latch hook that she used to make these shag rugs in the 70s. So she gave it to me, and I started playing around with it. And it quickly took over my life.
Rachelle?
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Right now, we're not in your full screen mode. Could you go back to the full screen?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Thanks.
So she gave me this latch hook, and I started experimenting, and it quickly took over my life. There's something really interesting that happens when you start rug hooking. There's this calmness. It just quiets the whole world around you. And so by 2006, I had my first solo show. And by 2008, I was moving my children and my husband across the country so I could do this full time. This rug here is called The Picnic. It explores a little bit of our life in Alberta. It was an easy transition for my children, and I really wanted to express that somehow visually. The crows or the ravens helped me do that. If you look at the series called Finding Home, this is the first rug that the crows kind of enter. Sorry. It enters my work because it wasn't easy. The girls were having a hard time adjusting. And I wanted to use the Alberta landscape to kind of help tell the story of where we were. And it wasn't a picnic. When you're thinking about going for a picnic, it's like a happy time. But I had to pay my daughters to pose for me. On this occasion, they were not happy. So this is another one from Finding Home series. It's me holding some Mitty sashes. For the Finding Home series, I received a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts for a series of 6 rugs for a solo show. And I commissioned an artist from Manitoba to hand weave these Mitty sashes. And if you look behind the rugs, that's what I use to finish the binding around them. It's this Mitty sash. And this was my expression of how I was adjusting to our new home. This one here is a 3-dimensional, one of the first 3-dimensional works I've done. It's a basket, and the image shows my daughter picking blueberries, and the crows are still present. And I was still kind of working through this kind of trauma of just starting fresh and helping the girls go through what they were going through. This one here was the last of the series. The crow is flying out of the basket, and it symbolizes that we were starting to be okay in our new situation. So this is a 3-dimensional piece also. And I'd like to mention that both these pieces here have no wire, so they stand on their own. And the way I achieved that was by putting them inside out. So the loops are in this image are on the outside, but now with the weight of the bag, they're kind of relaxing. So I flipped it inside out, and the loops help the bag stay up. So it's really, really interesting. And I still use the latch hook. I haven't really started using the rug hook at all. I don't use a frame, so hooking 3-dimensionally is really easy for me. I received a grant from SDA Association for exploring 3-dimensional works. So I started with the figure. Here is an image of me holding the 2 girls. And it's called Hands Full, when you're a new mother and kids running around. I really wanted to explore that idea. So there's a whole series of these figures. I think there's 11 in total that explore different times of their lives. There's one that Emma is balancing on the stand, and it represents her first steps. Because she fell and stuff like that and scratched her face. So I really, during my time in Alberta, I live in Katy, Texas now. We moved here in 2019. I really took the time to spend time with my family and explore this medium and with the subject matters of my family. To create a figure there's 32 pieces to the pattern. I hook it just like I hook another rug. And I took some classes in pottery so I could create the stands for the series. So you can see, oh, this is first step. So here, this is Emma trying to hold her balance when she first started walking. So these stands here are all handmade by me with clay. This one here is a reproduction of a blanket chest that we have in wood. And it took 20 pounds of clay. And this is the fifth try. It took me 5 tries to get a blanket chest that did not have any cracks or just fall apart on me. Because everybody knows that if you're working with clay, the success of your pieces don't always depend on you. The clay gods have something to do with it. This is a pair that I like to show together because it tells a story. When we were in Alberta, we often like taking rides in the country. And during a particular ride, my oldest, Lauren, said that I paid more attention to her, to Emma, than I did to her when they were young. And I immediately thought, okay, so what does that look like? What does me paying more attention to her look like? And after a few weeks, I started designing, and this is what it came out. So there's 1 Lauren and 5 Emma. So this is Emmanuel, and 3 Emmas. So this is what this rug represents. And it's the last one that I made in Alberta. This one here, I was asked by the Robert Bateman Center to participate in an exhibition, a textile exhibition, exploring fast fashion and the environment. Fashion industry is the 2nd largest polluter in the world, and they wanted me to use entirely for materials. They wanted me to use 100% recycled. And I think because I worked in the garment industry, I wasn't really interested in collecting all kinds of clothing and cut them up. So what I did is I contacted a company in Spain, and what they do is they recycle textiles and make yarn. So this one here is made entirely with yarn, and it's punch needled. So when I was almost finished, I placed it on the wall, and it's really, really heavy. And when it started draping on the side, I thought, wow, this is really much nicer draped on the side. So it's called tipping point. This one here is my latest work. I did it last winter, and it represents the last 2.5 years of how I felt during COVID. I'm a very emotional person, and when I sit down to design my work, I think about what's going on around me, what's going around in the world, and I start sketching, and this image came up because I felt like I was drowning during the last few years with COVID. The first year paralyzed me. I wasn't able to be creative at all. So this was how I felt. And it's a child sinking in water. And I use the breaking ice in the spring with leaves floating around and stuff like that. So there's a lot of thought that goes into my designs. And that's it.
Thank you all. Maybe the other two artists can come on and we can ask a few questions. We're getting lots of appreciation in the chat. Susan, a question for you. What is Frockter?
Froktors are the decorative motifs in German and also in Ontario. The documents that would be birth announcements, marriage certificates, welcome to a home, house blessings. So they're the beautiful decorative motifs, angels, flowers, trees, and they're the tiny, tiny little bookmarks that were created in the late 1700s up to the 1850s in the schools. Now go in antique sales for hundreds of thousands of dollars for a little 2-inch by 2-inch. So we like the decorative motifs, and that's a Frocktor. It really means broken lettering.
And then all the rugs are beautiful. Are all the works made using hooking or some with punch needle? I know, Rachelle, you mentioned you used the punch needle.
Yes. Well, the rug that you had at the beginning with the girl and the butterflies flying around, that one I used hand hooking also with a hook, but I also started using a tufting gun. So all the loose strands of yarn you can see, it's all from the tufting gun.
Nice. Yeah, I wondered how you did that.
Yeah. Yeah, because hand punching for me, I have one rug that I did entirely, well, the one with the shopping bag. It took so long, so much longer than just my latch hook. So I thought, okay, well, how can I figure out a way to make these things a little faster? So I started experimenting with it.
What about you, Heather?
I've only ever used the hand hooked technique. I haven't done needle punch or the tufting gun, but I mean, it looks exciting and fast. Never say never.
It does take a bit of practice. I can say that. Yeah.
Do you find, because if you switch colors a lot, I feel like it's good for big areas of one color, or?
No, I switch colors a lot. So it goes so much faster. Even if you're changing all the colors, well, the color all the time, it's still faster than hand hooking.
And then this is for Heather. Heather, where did you get the quotes in your earlier work? This person says they seem very of the period, but also contemporary.
The first quote on that oval shaped rug was from a folk song. And I think on the two journey rugs, which were the women finding enlightenment, were both biblical texts, but I always like to use the King James version because the language was so Shakespearean and beautiful. And I liked sort of taking biblical language out of context and putting it into this sort of, maybe I don't know if I'd call it feminist perspective, but definitely a non-specifically religious, but to celebrate the poetry of the language. So yeah, I would look into definitely music, and the Bible was where I was getting quotes.
Nice. There's a lot of questions about materials you use. And if you use other things besides wool, this is for everyone. I
stick mainly to wool. More recently, I've been using some wools that have a bit of acrylic, because I find when you dye them, they have an interesting effect because the acrylic doesn't dye. But I use yardage, and then I cut it into strips by hand. Some rug hookers have machines that cut the strips, but I like the look of the hand cut, just because it's, depending on what the thickness of the wool is, you can, cut it thinner or thicker, and it gives less of a uniform sort of feel. I've never hooked with yarn, but it's an option.
I use, if you take a look on my website, there's a rug, well, it was in the exhibition the one with the shopping bag, When Is Enough Enough, that was made entirely with yarn that used recycled denim, cotton, wool, cashmere, and plastic water bottles. So it was made entirely with recycled yarns. And I'm like you, Heather. I like to cut my strips by hand because you don't always need a unified line. So I shape my strips as I go. So I find you can add a lot more detail in your work by hand cutting.
And I like to use a mix of whatever material is going to create the effect or the thinness of a line. As Heather and Rachelle were talking about cutting a strip a different width. If I can choose 3 or 4 different types or strands of embroidery floss and put them all together, they'll bloom actually if they're different colors, kind of like a surprise every time I pull up the loop. And I have punch needled, but I have found that I'm a bit of a control freak. So I like to see every loop being formed rather than the mystery of what it looks like by working from the back. So I tend to pull up at any time is my preference, or doing my stitching and embroidering.
Yeah.
I do know that rug hooking certainly is meditative. It's therapy. And it's really good for people with wanting to be very organized and repetitive.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my question. How could you get started rug hooking? You guys have said it's easy. Are there books that we should reference, or do you teach classes? A couple of you
Well,
teach.
although I do teach, I don't teach technique necessarily. I teach encouraging. So experiment. That's literally, I know how to hook towards myself and away from myself, and you have to manipulate your hand underneath holding the strip differently. When I was asked, well, how do you do, or a lot of people rotate their frame, and I don't have to do that. But I figured it out myself. I wasn't taught that. So when I come up to a problem, I really like problem solving. In all of these, when you're using different techniques, you have to step back and think construction wise, oh, maybe I should paint the canvas before I hook, all the way around it. And there's this tiny little spot that I have to paint. I learned that by mistake, not because I thought of it first, but it's fun.
I found it very easy to start. Your hand gets into a rhythm, and you'll notice that when you're pulling up a loop, you'll always do the same action, so they end up being the same height. And I like wider strips, so the only way a wider strip will stay up is if you pull it up the same width, the same height as it is wide. So once I found that out, I just started. So I find it's really easy. It's an easy technique.
Definitely.
And I didn't have to worry about frames and fancy equipments either. You just hand cut everything.
That's what I found too. I don't have a frame either. I just do it on my lap. And there are actually a lot of great YouTube videos up close of people actually hooking, and they show the underside as well. So you can really get the idea of the hand above and the hand below and what they're doing. And if someone wanted to start and they had even just a crochet hook, you can try it with a crochet hook. If you've got a piece of burlap, a crochet hook, and some yarn or a piece of wool to cut into strips, then you can just give it a try and see if you like it, really.
And
I think Heather mentioned the real reward in rug hooking as opposed to other fabulous surface design techniques. It's forgiving. And that definitely, I mean, even as opposed to oil painting or watercolor, I just can't master those techniques, and I'm trying now. But when I learned rug hooking, like Heather said, I'm painting with wool. I instantly was able to paint.
And that's partly because you can take out the stitches.
Oh, you
pretty easily.
yeah, you can just rip it right out. It's very rewarding to pull it out.
Yeah.
Start again.
And then for the 3D works, how do you do that, Rachelle?
the same way I do the other ones.
Okay.
Like for the children, I'm a pattern maker. So it took a few tweaks. This one here, this little guy here was my first one with for a figure, and he kind of looks like ET. So all the parts that I didn't like, I just tweaked the pattern, and you just start. And the same thing with the baskets. You know, you design the shape, you maybe stitch a piece of linen just to make sure it's the right shape, and you start hooking. Sometimes I'll hook with the seam closed, sometimes I'll hook with the seam open. And that's why it's easy for me, because I don't need the frame. I don't need to stretch the linen on a frame to hook it before attaching it together.
And those, are they stuffed with something, the figures?
Yes, most of them have polyfill. The one that you had in the exhibition, Full Hands, that one was full of papier-mâché, because when I first attached the babies, they just fell forward. So the polyfill was just too soft. So I filled the whole body with papier-mâché, and it was able to stand up. Yeah. You know, you don't necessarily need someone to show you how to do things. You know, I often tell my students, you're allowed to be the first one to kind of try something, you know, if you're curious. So it's much easier than it looks.
Well, I tried it and it was,
It takes practice. It really does. And sometimes the practice that you need is in a different hook. You know, there's all kinds of different shapes and sizes. So try a different hook. It might work well or better.
and then for those who hand cut, are you using a rotary cutter, or how do you do that?
I have these scissors that I got during my first job in the industry. It was a bridal shop. So it's these old pair of Weiss scissors, and they're indestructible. In 30 years, I have yet to sharpen them.
I have the same scissors.
Oh, you
Yeah,
do?
yeah.
They're amazing.
That's what
They're
I use.
amazing.
That's what I use.
And I'm left-handed. So my first job, when I would go in the back and use the scissors from the cutters, and they would know because they're right-handed, and it would make the blade not as sharp. So the boss went in his drawer and got me a left-handed pair, and I've had them ever since.
Okay, well, on that note, does anyone have anything else they would like to say? I just think doing this exhibition, it's like seeing the variety and the scale of the work. I was surprised by the scale. You guys are so ambitious in what you do. So I really appreciate everything that you guys are doing. It's been fabulous to see. Also where you get your inspiration, from family to nature, from mythology. It's just been a really wonderful experience. So thank you.
Well, thank you for doing the exhibition. I think it was time. It was really time to see what the contemporary rug hooking artists are doing. And it was really exciting to be taking part of it. So thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, Emily. It was an amazing experience. It was really great.
Thanks.
I agree. It was definitely a time, and you've only found the tip of the iceberg of contemporary people working. So we would encourage a repeat of a show in the near future.
Definitely.
And many other venues that hooked rug work can be shown at. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all for joining us for today's textile talk. And thank you to Emily and everyone at the Wisconsin Museum of Quilts and Fiber Arts for being our guest host today. Thank you, Rachelle, Susan, and Heather for bringing this incredible artwork to Textile Talks. And of course, thank you to our sponsors at the platinum level, Moda Fabrics and Supplies and Quilting Daily. At the silver level, equilter.com, Orifil, and the Tourville family. And at the bronze level, Artistic Artifacts, Clover, Empty Spool Seminars, Misty Fuse, 9 Patch Fabrics, Quilt Mania, Schiffer Publishing, Tie Silks, and thequiltshow.com. I hope that you will remember these sponsors when you have some shopping to do and let them know that Textile Talk sent you. Next week's Textile Talk is a QSOS interview with Pat Sloan, conducted by Francis O'Rourke Dowell, and that's presented by the Quilt Alliance. As always, it is next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and you can register and find all of the information at saqa.com/textile talks. Thank you all and have a great week.
Thank you.